All right, thank you guys. It's time for my final thought. A system is defined as a set of things working together as parts of a mechanism or an interconnecting network. There are systems all around us hard at work, every moment of every day. Some are obvious, physical, mechanical in nature. Others quietly working in the background, unseen and unspoken, defined by stereotyping and profiling. Texas native Jonathan Price came up against one of these Saturday night in his hometown. Jonathan was at a convenience store when he witnessed a scene of domestic violence. A man who would help anyone, he stepped in to assist the woman and ended up in an altercation with her abuser. According to witnesses' claims, things had calmed down when police arrived on the scene, and that's when Officer Sean David Lucas, attempting to detain Jonathan, tased him and then shot him, ending his life there in the parking lot. He was 31. It was Jonathan who was stopping the violence, assisting the victim. No matter, Officer Lucas saw him as a threat and the system went to work, just as we've seen before. Lucas has been arrested, charged with murder, but we know the system can fail in that regard because we've seen this too, just recently in fact. But here's the twist. Jonathan didn't believe in the system. According to his Facebook posts, he had nothing but positive interactions with law enforcement, saying he never experienced racist energy from local police. And I'm sure he didn't. Until he did, becoming another victim, another hashtag name, another reason to march. That's how systems work. They're impersonal. They don't care about singular experiences. They don't care what a person's station in life is, as evidenced by Versace VP Salahi Bembury, who after shopping while black was allegedly profiled by police, stopped for jaywalking after leaving the Beverly Hills store he runs. Officers let him go on his way without issuing a ticket, but not before robbing him of his time and running his ID. And for what? The system. Two examples, one ending in a familiar feeling of helpless frustration, the other tragedy. Both driven by the same impetus, an interconnected network full of suspicions and fears. In the background, hard at work, but never seen until it is. We're going to continue this conversation online. Keep it locked to WSA9 and WSA9.com. And don't forget the app. Follow us on Instagram at GetUpDC. Stay safe, stay beautiful. You know what it is. Get Up DC.